Hey there, welcome to episode 16 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. Today is the afternoon of Wednesday, February 28th, 2024. Got a little late start recording today, but I wrote the show yesterday, promise. Today we're going to talk about the troubling troublemakers that are the troublemaking triumvirate of tech. I kind of screwed that up a little bit, but the troublemaking triumvirate of tech. What could that possibly mean? I call them the big three. I've always viewed this group of three, the terrible three, as sort of mutually argumentative. Kind of always a tension between each separately. The big three, nowhere more effective at causing trouble than in the dot-com days in Silicon Valley. But they do their work anywhere and everywhere and at any time. The link's in the show notes, wherever you have found this podcast. The usual self-promotion, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, lists all my various projects. You are under no obligation to buy me a coffee. But if you want to, go ahead. Any proceeds will go for coffee. But I also use it to link to my various projects from one central place. Ko-fi.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo, another self-promotional tool. Some other links. What is marketing? The American Marketing Association has the definition of what is marketing. Are you getting some idea what the big three are? Sales. I have a couple Wikipedia page links for the rest of these. Wikipedia on what is sales? What is engineering? What is marketing? That's the big three: sales, engineering, marketing. They may go by other names. There may be specific roles: inside sales, outside sales, MRO sales, whatever. Engineering, same thing. Could be QA is sometimes put in engineering, which will be relevant for my discussion today. You could be a field applications engineer. You could be a sales engineer. And then marketing, probably the most mysterious. Salespeople are selling things, engineering people are making things, and marketing people are doing something. What is a triumvirate, by the way? Another Wikipedia page all about that. It's arguably applicable, but it sounds good. The triumvirate of tech. And then I have a quick link to the famous blind man and an elephant parable, also on Wikipedia. So there you go, the big three, the troublemaking triumvirate of tech: sales, marketing, engineering, product development, whatever they want to call engineering. In the beginning, I moved to Silicon Valley in 1993 with my engineering degree from Harvey Mudd College. That would make me one of the engineering people, perhaps, for a while. My very first job right out of college, after several months of looking, 2 months. Graduated mid-May. Started work, first day of work at Supermac, July 17, 1993. So 2 months. I was benchmarking. Well, I think I was hired initially just to test graphic cards. QA will figure into my career a bit, which is actually good. I'll get to that later. But eventually, for some reason, I think I said something like, I know how to work a stopwatch, which was very rarely used. I don't know why they assigned me a stopwatch, and I was going to be in charge of benchmarking. Now, Supermac Technologies was known at the time for a few things. One of them was accelerated graphic cards for the Macintosh platform, aimed specifically at high-end professional application: PageMaker, Quark, Photoshop. Those are probably the big three. So the Thunder 2, Thunder 24, DSP acceleration for Photoshop plugins, etc. Fun times. And so my job was to run benchmarks in a scientific way, so somewhat reproducible, minimizing variables and whatnot. Run competitive benchmarks between our products and our competitors. And I used to interact with marketing quite a bit. So I learned the excitement that is trying to convince people to buy your product by comparing it unfavorably with your competitors. Well, you favor our products, obviously. And so any benchmark that would show our products better, so long as we could make a bar graph showing a nice big delta. And in the finer print, it would be like, we're 25 times faster at doing this one thing that you'll never ever do, but we're faster doing it. And you still find that today. So that was my own brush with the Trio. And it was only the beginning. So I only very sort of tangentially interacted with any salespeople, but I was definitely hanging out with the marketing folks. So that was my beginning, my introduction to the exciting world. Eventually I would get laid off. I think it was October 1st. So I had my 2.5 solid months at Supermac Technologies before I was pounding the pavement. I would eventually, thanks to a referral from one of my colleagues, it was actually Dave Duran at Supermac, had come to Supermac from Apple. So I was able to, with his help, get my resume into the Apple cave, Apple computer. And I would eventually work in Apple quality. I think it was HLQ, high level quality or something. All kinds of Qs in the acronyms. So I got a job in Apple quality. Why, by the way, did I get jobs in quality initially? So it was the recession, coming out of the recession of the 90s, the early 90s. And having just graduated from college, I had no experience necessary. So getting a job in engineering was tricky. I figured if I get a job at Apple, I'll interview internally. We'll see what happens. That did happen, but I still faced the number one problem, which was, you don't really have a lot of experience. And of course, that's how I get it though, is by getting a job. But because of the economy at the time, the job market and so on, this was before the .com sort of took off. So 1993 was sort of an inflection point. You started seeing an end to the recession, hand waving. We know what that's like today, because we said it's over. Now, new president rolled into town, Bubba, Bill Clinton, and of course the invention of the internet thanks to Al Gore. So everything would change. But when I started at Apple, I was just a normal QA person. I was testing the Finder on the new Power Macintosh upgrade card when the Power Mac was a new thing. So it was a couple of processors ago. So the Power PC, the 601, was coming out. And so I got to I moved around a bit in the Apple quality organization and took the time to interview, but I got also to interact with a lot of Apple people. The Power Mac being the new thing, like it was all hands on deck. Everybody must be testing the Power Mac. It's the new direction of the company. And so that's what we did. So I was part of, even though I was just a contractor, by the way, not an employee of Apple. They make that very clear. But I was part of a lot of meetings, and I interacted with a lot of program management and whatnot. I learned the forked road that is an Apple project. We, of course, would look at the engineering requirement specification, the ERS. And there was a companion document called the marketing requirements document. Right away, you should be thinking, that's going to be trouble. You have marketing people coming up with something that they want, and the engineering people coming up with something they're going to try to make. And the way I would describe it is, if you imagine these two different documents being developed in isolation and becoming less and less similar, and about halfway through, somebody says, oh, wait a minute, these are not the same. And the rest of the time on the project timeline is spent pushing them together, trying to make them meet somewhere down the road so that they are at least a little bit similar, so that the salespeople have something to sell. The program managers, it's not project managers, these are program managers, seem to be driven by the marketing desire found in the MRD, marketing requirements document, over the engineering reality. Of course, in the engineering group, that's how I would see things. Now, if you're in the marketing group, you're probably like, this is our reality, and whatever you're building is wrong. This is probably a Steve Jobs legacy. Steve Jobs was much more into the story, and though he was a technologist, not to diminish some of his accomplishments via proactive management. But the fact is, Apple at the time was absolute chaos as far as delivering on the Power PC, Power Mac product concept. So a lot of moving parts and things had to move. To give you one example, when the launch party for System 7, which was going to be the new thing, System 7, had to launch. This was after the Power Mac was ready. System 7 was going to be the OS that would launch on it. And I moved at that time to the API test group. So I was coding test cases for bulk platform testing, automated testing. So API test group, automation, better living through automation. So because the launch party for System 7 and Power Max, I think, together or something, whatever it was, the launch party was scheduled. It was like today, but we still had showstopper bugs. They had a meeting and they decided to change the definition of what a showstopper bug is so that we could launch the product, have the party, and then do what's called a point release later. This allowed the salespeople to deliver on their goals, their targets for getting the product out the door and into the channel, allowed the marketing people to step up their marketing, and allowed the engineers to immediately get back to work fixing the bugs that we're going to ship. So this became commonplace in my time at Apple. I worked on a few projects when I was with Apple Quality. I would later go work in the Newton Group. That's a different part of today's episode. In my travels in Silicon Valley, and so again, this is heavily skewed towards the Silicon Valley mindset, the Silicon Valley method. I was before move fast and break things, but there's a reason that got adopted so easily. So I found that big companies keep these three, the Triumvirate, they keep them separate. So engineers make things, like I said, engineering being kind of a generic term. But engineering is normally, you would probably think of like a mechanical engineer, structural engineer, people building bridges and roads, or as I like to say, driving the big trains. But engineering now has become software programmer, developer. You will hear the term software engineer, which I call myself. I think that is different than programmer, but that's it's always a subject of debate. Salespeople sell things. So if your job is to make sure that someone orders something, you sell it to them. And so you have your channel sales and your outside sales, inside sales. So your job, if you're in sales, is to convince someone to sign on the dotted line to pay for something. And that could be Best Buy or the former Fry's Electronics or whomever buying a million Macintosh computers. Or it could be small computer stores, or it could be online sales, it could be anything, it could be all kinds of stuff. So salespeople, it's I'm not going to say it's simple, but if you're going to describe what engineering and salespeople do, you would imagine, if you were thinking restaurant, the engineering team is in the kitchen, the salespeople are front of the house, right? Engineering back of the house, sales front of the house. So marketing people come up with a way to trick the other two, engineering and sales, into thinking that they are not doing enough for the customer. That's a little cynical. Marketing, obviously, you are creating demand, you're creating interest, you are telling the story. There's a lot of, you can flip through the definition of marketing link. I included in the link section. So the marketing people were always kind of mysterious, kind of the troublemakers. The marketing people I knew, this was not necessarily Apple, but marketing people I knew would do what we would call selling the demo. And then you'd turn the demo into a product, right? So you'd do a demo, the marketing people would go out and show it off to potential partners and customers and whatnot. This is different from sales because you're generating demand. So it could be marketing people getting a magazine article written or a photo shoot featuring your unreleased product. That actually happened. Like, why is this published in a magazine? It's not done yet. You have a high resolution picture. The marketing people would basically go and stir it up. And so when the demo becomes a product, that's where you do a demo for some marketing person so they can, or team or group, right? You build a demo, you make it work, the demo path. Like, this is the only thing that works. It barely works. So you have to do this, then this, then this. Don't do that, and then this, then that. And invariably they would get, okay, well, they want that. That's what they want. You're like, well, that was just a demo. Oh no, we have to ship this now. That's a real story. Demo becomes a product. If you say that to someone in engineering, especially older engineering folk, they will roll their eyes. They make cringe. We all know. We all know what that is. Now, salespeople, by the time they are selling the thing, hopefully it's ready. It's been the result of marketing and engineering arguing over what it is we are making. And then the marketing people can tell the salespeople, here's what I told them to make so you can sell it. And then we'll see if we actually deliver what you've been selling. So yeah, it's always some tension, making things go, moving fast and breaking things. So yeah, big companies keep these separate groups, which I found to be troubling. I think there are 3 reasons to separate these. They are linked. Obviously, you basically, the mindset is like, well, we have to have all 3. And so I think my 3 thoughts are that this is for management and empire building. So you have your C-suite executives, your CTO, your CMO. I assume there's a CSO. Sometimes they call it like a chief revenue officer or something. So chief technology, chief marketing, and then chief sales or some equivalent. So they start at the top, and you have your fiefdom to construct. And so keeping them isolated makes it easier. The incentive structure for each of the verticals varies. So if you're an engineer, and the big thing during the .com era was the ISO, the incentive stock option. Your options would vest over 4 years, and you'd get 1 million options at 10 cents or something. And then, hopefully you do your job and you get big money at the end. And then you look over at, and by the way, you are working, 80, 100-hour weeks sometimes. You're banking your time now to be compensated later based on the success of a group of people who have no connection to your day, and yet they determine your financial future and whether this was all worth your time. So if the salespeople do their job, salespeople have no direct connection to the product. So you're all kind of helping each other without knowing each other, so to speak, I guess. Not always strictly true, but so the ISO or incentive stock option. Now there are RSOs and whatever. It's a different world. This was compared to the SPIF, which is I gotta look that up again. I think it's SPIF now. I think it had other names back then. SPIF. Sales Performance Incentive Fund. So this was basically, and I found that marketing people also tended to get something like a SPIF. So, there was a different acronym, which I cannot remember. This is a long time ago. But nowadays, the whole SPIF concept is you just get a bonus for working. So you hit some sales goal, you hit some milestone, etc. When I was working at Intel, so this was my most recent foray into big company, hopefully my last. Thanks to my interactions with Google, just randomly like, hey, can you stop off in Mountain View and go to Google, talk to them about the Galileo board? And like, yeah, sure. So I went, even though this was sort of in my purview anyway, but I was not in sales or whatever. So I show up at Google, I have an hour chat with them to go over some things about how the Galileo board worked. And end of the year, I got the equivalent of a SPIF, whatever it was, some sort of credit, some sort of little bonus program funds on top of our normal milestone and whatever. So Intel was big on the bonus program, but I did specifically get the same credit that a salesperson would get, or the people in the group that was supporting Google. So I received a financial benefit for my efforts, my successful efforts. So that was nice. But that was sort of out of left field, right? So I normally was not receiving SPIFs or the equivalent. So my little foray into customer engagement, which was probably interesting. I think we'll get to that in a second. But so the incentive structures are different, or can be different, between the 3. If you're at a startup, everybody gets their ISOs because that's the model, right? Just like working in a restaurant. We're not going to pay you a normal amount. We are going to rely on our customers fill in the gaps later, in this case through stock options that vest and which will go up in value, ideally. And then, of course, focus, or the belief that each of these, of the three, of the triumvirate, is modular, can operate almost in isolation from the other two. So this frees up the management and empire building, and it allows you to do the different types of incentive or reward programs without intermingling. So nobody's going to say, well, I also did, well, just like I just described. I did a little bit of marketing. Do I get a spiff? And so I think it becomes clear to to factor the problem. Like, oh, we have all these people doing different jobs. They're all interrelated. Well, let's keep them separated. They should barely talk to each other. And that way they can be measured. We can determine who. Then we can do layoffs, right? Like if all of your people are doing all the roles, you can't just willy-nilly start laying off your engineering team because they're also doing some of the other stuff. So those are my theories, right? So management and management structure, incentive, and then the focus of the people in each of the verticals, and how you do so the management and that go together, but I think they're two different things. So ultimately, the seems to, in a big company, seems to lead to sprawl. You end up with, especially if you're geographically large, you end up with different teams in different geographical locations. This was before the work from home or remote worker trend, wherever that is now and wherever it will be. But eventually you find that your team is kind of spread out a little bit. That only helps with that isolation. So, focus. And they may not know each other. They may not talk to each other, but through Zoom calls and emails, which on the surface is fine. Remote work is not a problem, but it's when there is a built-in isolation or us-them mentality. If you're going to be measured on your effort, but you're completely separate, but your end goal is the same, right? Like we want to sell this thing. We're spending all of our time making the thing, and the salespeople are out there selling it, and the marketing people are going out convincing people to want to be excited, want to buy, etc. So we all kind of have the same goal, but our path to get there may be different. We may not even trust the other two. I know for a fact in my travels that engineering people will always be frustrated by marketing because marketing people want to tell a story about something that doesn't yet exist. So your salespeople will sell a thing that does exist. Occasionally they'll sell a thing, vaporware or coming soon. But the marketing people, they must generate the enthusiasm for a thing that does not yet exist or is in active development. So they're, the marketing people did that. They turned my demo into a product. They changed the product. Marketecture is a big one. They designed the product in a PowerPoint slide deck. They've described things that don't exist. So there's always you don't understand what you're talking about. You're at odds with what we're doing. Our goals are different. Our incentive structure, our manager, all these things are different, and they can occasionally impact the interaction between the three, even though everybody you would imagine has the same goal. The path to the goal can vary and can sometimes block. You may feel like, hey, marketing is the most important thing because I'm in marketing, but you're intentionally or unintentionally slowing down or confusing or putting sales at risk. I know if you've ever heard of cannibalizing, when your marketing department starts pitching a new product that makes people say, oh, I'm going to wait for the new product and not buy the current product. And your salespeople will say, hey, you just took out my spiffs for the quarter. And the engineering people are like, don't bother us. None of you know what you're talking about. So yeah, there's always a little bit of tension between the three in my travels. Your mileage may vary. And of course, this is over the last 30 years. So I'm going to run through some of my specific educational milestones. Today, things may be different, although I suspect not by much. Again, my last job working for Intel was actually, it was a long time ago now. Too long to think. I started working at Intel about 10 years and 2 weeks ago. So a lot has transpired. So my own education over the last 30 years, so starting with Super Mac July 17. I'm not going to give you dates for each, but July 17, 1993, the journey begins. After graduating from college, I was doing benchmarks for marketing, working in the lab, which was a combination of like engineering QA and marketing benchmarks and product demos and so on. So salespeople would bring some clients in, especially for the Fuji Xerox product. You can, if you're curious about that, you can look up counterfeiting and the use of the Fuji Xerox color copier with the Supermac Technologies RIP. You can make almost perfect copies of money. It's an interesting time. Later, I would work, after I got laid off, I would work at the QA group in Apple. Got to learn about MRDs and ERSs, so I kind of went through that. I did QA at Truvision after I left Apple. So Apple, by the way, I was a contractor. You could only work 18 months. Then you had to go away. So I think I made it like 12 months, 13, 14, something like that. And I said, I've had enough. I'm going to go on to other things. So I get a job at Truvision. Was formerly Raster Ops. It was going through the name change right around that time. Took a job in QA with the presumption that I would, because again, the recession was a thing. So getting a job in engineering when you only had a degree but no practical experience. Now, I will say I had experience from our clinic projects, so I wasn't completely textbook only. But at the time, because of the job market and because the people I was talking to in hiring management roles were typically middle management, so they didn't really know what they were looking for. They would just look for some bullet items. So they're like, well, we really want to have twice as many years of experience as this thing has existed. This was not uncommon. You'd see like, you need to have 20 years of C++ experience. You're like, hasn't C++ only been around for like 10 years? So it was difficult to meet the job requirements for various job roles. So QA job at Truvision, which was really educational. Truvision being a very small company, just because I was a QA tester did not mean I was limited. I could interact freely with everyone. There's no real us, them issue. All of engineering, sales, marketing, accounting, you could talk to anybody. You can wander around the building, which I did. Get to know your coworkers, see who's doing what. Everybody in the other groups could find out what we were working on. They would ask me, like, so what are you guys doing in there? Accounting would be like, oh, we always are buying you guys lunch. We're always signing off on these POs and whatnot. But like, what is this? So it was good to be able to interact with people. I would eventually move to the engineering group and work with Asia Pacific sales, visit Sony in Atsugi, Japan, to work on the DV Pro. So by starting with QA, and I did not really know much about video editing and how video worked, I learned a tremendous amount about old school video capture. Back in my day, it was difficult to capture full NTSC resolution, like overscan 720 by 480 or normal 640 by 480 or PAL, which is what 576 by something, or SICAM if you're French. So all these different resolutions, capturing analog to digital video compression. It was hard to keep up. So it was a good learning experience. And this will be a theme throughout my rundown that I'm giving you. QA, you basically get to see how things work. From a technical standpoint, for my background and my interests and whatnot, it was actually utilitarian. Although for a little while I was cursed to be thought of as just, literally, they would include the word just, a tester. So that was unfortunate, but some people are enlightened and they see the value. But I've never really, once I got past Truvision, I was never really doing QA, even though I had job roles in QA groups for the purposes of job description and hiring. But yeah, almost never did I do the job that I was hired for. It was always a pivot into something much more interesting. So I would leave Truvision and go back to Apple. I worked in the Newton Group. If you don't know what the Newton is, don't worry. It was basically handwriting recognition hallucination. So I was working on the C++ SDK, so I'd write C++ code for the Newton all day. But I did learn a lot about how the Newton worked. Newton script, very, very, very similar to JavaScript, which I would encounter a couple years later. Wouldn't we all? And so I got to learn how the platform worked. Now, the Newton group at Apple was off in its own building, R&D 5? 4? 5. 5. We were next to R&D 4 where the cafeteria was, yeah. So R&D 5, fun group, kind of off on their own. Met Walter Smith, met all the luminaries from the Newton history, and got to interact with everybody. So working on with program managers on features and action items, and how they'd have the big Hobies coffee cake meetings at least monthly. It must have been, I don't think it was weekly, but it was frequently enough so that this entire sheet of Hobies would sort of satisfy this entire team of development and marketing and sales. So that was an interesting experience. It was definitely an interesting difference between my first time working for Apple and this other time. Eventually, I would leave the Apple Newton and leave Apple behind me for the most part, and move on to SCM Microsystems, where I was a marketing technologist. I was working for the person who hired me at Supermac. So he was a marketing person with a physics degree. So we were basically off in the corner of a sales and marketing office, mostly sales, in Los Gatos, where most of the engineering for what we were working on, the smart card products, very early days, were in La Ciotat, France. So I visited France, hung out at La Ciotat, which is on the Azure coast of the Mediterranean. Very nice, very pretty city. Got to know everybody, how cards work, ISO 7816. Still comes in handy today. So learned a bunch of stuff there, but technically working in marketing. So the idea was to be able to describe to my boss how things worked. And I barely knew for a little while, but worked out. Eventually, I would be tired of working in a sales office, though, because nobody had any idea what they were talking about. Remember, geographically separated. Salespeople in California, engineering in La Ciotat, France, already cultural divide, much larger than the geographical divide. But it just became challenging to me, and not in a good way. So I would depart SCM Microsystems to work at Netscape, which was the up-and-comer. They had gone public while I was at TrueVision, so we were talking about that. I remember one morning, like, oh, did you hear this Netscape company went public? Oh, big IPO. Everybody got rich on those incentive stock options in engineering. So I moved to the Netscape group. They were very excited by my smart card background, but I never used it. I was working in the core technologies group. I was on core security group? Security group in the core technologies group, I guess. So secure email, secure socket, secure. I did a project with RSA. That was fun. The secure ID, if you're familiar nowadays, it's just your authenticator. But the hardware token, that was the secure ID little one-time password, time-based one-time password. It looked like a little pocket calculator without buttons on it. It would generate a 6-digit code. This was before everybody had cell phones in their pockets to do the same thing. So I was in the core technology group as an engineer, real live engineer, not even QA. But I did have to interact with various parts of the company. Now, Netscape was a fast-growing small company. So by the time I was leaving Netscape, they were designing their 30-building campus. So they would have these calm meetings about how, oh yes, we're going to expand into take over Mountain View. But I was in the Middlefield engineering building on I don't know if it was building 1 or 2, but it was if you were looking at the building at the fountain, I was on the left. We'd go over to the other building, and then eventually there was I'm sorry, the fountain was the main building. Engineering Middlefield building was one building. What direction would that be? Southeast. And so we would occasionally walk over to the main building where the fountain was. But anyway, engineering, Netscape, a lot of interaction with various people That was an interesting time. But there would be, okay, a little inside baseball here. The communicator, I was there between Navigator and Communicator, so Netscape 3 to Netscape 4. Netscape 4, which would have the mail news client and all kinds of features that were aimed at enterprise so that they could sell it into seat licensing and whatnot. So we would have these comm meetings with salespeople. So we would always spot them. They were the people wearing ties. The program was being driven by a pure engineer who was a little bit nutty. He would send out emails to the entire team about how he was frustrated and depressed. That's not a good idea. But so that was my first interaction with a fast-moving company that was smaller. So you could literally know all of the 50 or 100 people in a room, big room, everybody doing different things, but everybody was trying to ship this product that was being developed super fast. So that was the early days of making things after breaking them or something. Now, moving fast, breaking things. Before that was cool, we were trying to do that. And so I was somewhat in security, but I was also, what else was I working on there? Well, I was always in the security products or components group. I was in the, we called it the hardcore technology part of core technologies. Anyway, so that was a great interaction with various parts of the company. The people with the ties were trouble. And this is kind of a running theme in general. That's why it's the Troublemaker Triumvirate. There was always this tension because the salespeople really wanted to sell. That was their goal, right? I want to sell. I want to have money, my commissions, my spiffs, whatever. It was the marketing people, though, that you're never really sure because marketing people don't sell things. They create a desire for the salespeople to fill. I'm not reading the definition, but that's essentially they're doing this like in the restaurant analogy. The engineering is the back of the house, the front of the house as a sales group. So marketing is like making commercials. They're making plans for promotions, like come in on Thursdays, ladies' night, or whatever. So marketing people are kind of like in this the hinterlands of they're out there causing trouble. They're telling people things that aren't true because they're trying to generate, and then they'll come back and say, okay, people are interested in the thing I was telling them, so now that we have to make that and change what we're making. So again, yeah, a lot of tension that would, educational, very educational. After I left Netscape, it was kind of funny because when I left, there was a little bit of angst, but I think it was like 2 months later, they had big layoffs. So I would have gotten laid off anyway. On to UMax Computer Corporation. I was working with the person who hired me at Supermac, for whom I worked at SEM Microsystems. So he was going to UMax. He said, hey, why don't you come to UMax and we're doing PowerPC platform. So because I was working at Netscape on all of the platforms, and by the way, I did a nice podcast episode of Let's Innovate for Vegas with Tara Hernandez, who was in charge of the build group at Netscape. So we had to build our stuff on all of the platforms, Windows, Mac, BOS sometimes, all the Unix machines, AIX, SunOS, Solaris, the list goes on. So I think like a dozen Unix platforms. So because I had so much exposure to all these platforms and processor hardware, MIPS and Spark, x86, PowerPC, 68K, and also because I was at Apple, when I started at UMax, they said, oh, you could be the person, sort of the liaison for the PowerPC platform, which was sometimes called CHIRP, Common Hardware Reference Platform, CHIRP. But it went through, it was CHIRP, then PrEP, PowerPC Reference Platform, and then PowerPC Platform, PPCP. So you'll be in charge of that, like making sure that Solaris or SunOS for PowerPC or whatever it was, and Windows NT for PowerPC, all that stuff all has to work. So you'll just be in charge of all that. I was like, okay. But then it became very apparent very quickly that I was going to be working on open firmware for our in-development PowerPC platform, the Basecamp, as we called it. So these were our development boards for our giant motherboard doing all the PPCP stuff. So I stepped in one day like, oh, I can build this on my Linux PPC machine on my desk. This software dropped from Apple. So like, oh, you know how to do this stuff. Why don't you work on firmware? So my pivot. So once again, not doing the job I was hired for. And then when the whole company had to pivot to x86 because Apple was pulling their licensing. So, not doing Mac licensed designs anymore. So we pivoted to our x86, taking over from Intergraph as the Intel boutique platform development company with whom they would launch products. So we had the very first slot 1 x86s and so on. That's the Pentium 2 line of processors, very, very long time ago. Don't worry about that stuff. So because UMax was a very small company, although UMax was geographically separated between Santa Clara, California, very, very near Great America, and the current present-day 49ers Stadium. We used to go to Great America like every day during the summer. That was fun. Walk across the street, no problem. But and then the other half of the company was in Fremont. And then, of course, the company being Taiwanese, the main UMax Data Systems, UDS, was in Taiwan. So was the UMax Group, which was the parent. So we were geographically separated, but all of engineering was essentially in Santa Clara. Marketing kind of moved to Fremont. So right away, problems. But so I was interacting with all of the different groups of the small company. The whole company, maybe 50 people, maybe. Firmware group was 4. PowerPC chipset group was 4. Yeah, so we're talking small little teams, mostly supporting current products. So we were selling licensed designs and designing a new PowerPC platform. So it was an interesting place. I often say that UMax was one of my favorite jobs because it was easy to wear many hats. It was easy to be involved with many things. So a small company, not so much vertical isolation, a little bit, but not nearly as much. The geography was probably more of an issue because you could be in a meeting with everybody. You know, we would have the weekly staff meeting. It was everybody from the reception desk to the general manager, all in one room, go around the table. That was not the 50 people. 50 people were in 2 different places. But anyway, so very interesting. Probably the best, from my perspective, the best interaction and integration between the verticals, even though the company itself was kind of a mess. But it's not here anymore. So when Apple pulled their licensing and the x86 business model proved to be very difficult because everybody was making x86 products. So being the boutique platform vendor for Intel was interesting, but not really sustainable. So we ended up kind of shutting down. My always manager from Supermac and SCM Microsystems and here at UMax, even though I did not work for him at UMax, said, "Hey, we're forming a new group at Philips Components." And he was to be the general manager of the software and electronics business unit, CBU, which was part of the Flat Display Systems group, which is part of Philips Components. So Flat Display Systems was in Eindhoven, in Holland, and it was somewhat at Philips Semiconductor in Palo Alto, and it was mostly in our Philips building in San Jose. So here I was working at a company much larger than Intel, global. My second day on the job, I think it was, we were on a plane to Eindhoven to meet the other part of the team. So my first foray into the exciting world of the Netherlands. It's where I learned that the Princess Bride, the two political or the two sides, Gilder and Florin, those are terms for Dutch money. Anyway, the visit to Eindhoven, the interaction with the people in the building. So we worked in a building that was primarily accounting and HR and sales and marketing. Very little engineering development. There were engineering management people in the building. So we immediately ran into trouble because we were sequestered in our own little lab without windows. We had our cubes in there, so we didn't even have to be a part of the rest of the goings on. I would occasionally be notified. How come that guy's coming in at 10 a.m.? We're supposed to be here at 9. And of course, my witty banter, my sardonic retort. I left at 10 p.m. last night. Where were you? So there was definitely not as much cohesion in a super large, I think it was 160,000 global at the time. Philips is a shadow of its former self, but at the time it was a big giant company. We were in Philips Components, there was Philips Electronics, there was Philips Medical, all this stuff. So Philips of the old days. So we were OEMing our product. So I worked very closely with our marketing. We were trying to come up with different ways of building modules and reusable components and OEMable things to sell to other partner companies and so on. So the work I was doing was pretty closely tied to the marketing and sales efforts of the Flat Display Systems group. So that was also educational, but also total chaos. So eventually I would leave there. It was just not cutting it. And in fact, Philips Components would eventually, very shortly after, like I departed, and then they moved to a different building, which would later become the Palm building, where I also worked. So Philips moved into the soon-to-be Palm building. Massive layoffs. Philips Semiconductor disappeared. That's what NXP became. Big company restructuring, massive layoffs. Like I said, a shadow of its former self. So it was an interesting time. I think I timed my departure fairly well. So I started working for Leapfrog as a plain old software engineer, hired as a consultant for Leapfrog Toys. Here, all of engineering was in Los Gatos, California, right up the street from SCM Microsystems. I used to drive by Netflix every day when Netflix was just some random company that would send you DVDs in red envelopes. They would certainly not be a big player, would they? So heading to Leapfrog every day, making decent money as a hourly billing consultant, 1099. And I worked with all the people. They had a remote program management team in Emeryville, so a couple of hours north in traffic, yet lifetimes of gap and separation. Complete and utter confusion day by day. As a consultant, I didn't really want to be drawn into the politics and so on. Fun fact, we were developing this brand new product aimed at a new market segment. For some reason, they just hired one. They were going to hire three. They hired one, me, to work on this thing that was still being designed and specified during the development, so it wasn't even final. Somewhere in there, a U.S. Weather plane was flying near the south coast of China and almost bumped into, I think, or maybe actually bumped wingtips with another jet and ended up landing in Hainan, where they were detained for a while. So there was a dramatic strife within the company. Leapfrog was attempting to go public, and suddenly they were not sure if they could continue being in business, if the toy city somewhere in Guangdong was going to continue making their toys for them. So an interesting time. But here again, I got to work with different groups. So even though I was in engineering, but only as a consultant, but I would work with all the other people involved in the company, got to know everybody, etc. So small company versus big company, very apparent in this scheme. But I would decide to leave the Bay Area, and this was I started working for them December of 2000. And I was working straight through to August of 2001. So 9 months of product development. One person doing the job of three. When the product was 3 months late, it was supposed to be done they started late. They would have normally started this product right when they launched their new products would come out in August, September for the school year, educational products. So that's normally when they would start their next year's products. So they got a late start. I signed a contract with them in December of 2000, January of 2001, all the way. They were supposed to be shipping to released to China for manufacturing in basically June, but we did not finish until August. So they were going to have to. They couldn't do quite literally the slow boat from China. They had to do flying parts over and whatnot. But it was absolutely total chaos. This is the downside of having a big sort of unified mishmash. is that there was a lot of finger pointing and whatnot. And because I was the hired consultant, it was all my fault. But another course completed in my engineering education curriculum, or tech curriculum. So I would leave the Bay Area, moved back to Phoenix to do some consulting and work remotely. And then 9/11 happened, so that changed. So August 2001, January, did I say 2000? So January of 2001, started working on the product for real. August, final sign off, release to manufacturing. Very late, but that's how when you hire those damn consultants. And by the way, because I was talking to everybody, because I was, it was a small company, they're all friendly. Like, hey, Dan, we need someone to work on this other thing too. Do you want to work on this? So right away, I learned after the fact the joy of having a statement of work that's very clear. So they didn't hire 2 other people. They just had one person doing the work of 3. The program managers and project specs and all that were all changing right up till the end. And somewhere in there, they said, hey, do you want to work on a different thing at the same time? Sorry about that. Studio near a road. We're actually outside on the sidewalk, street vending. So I moved to Phoenix, did some remote engineering eventually in about 2005 for salon.com. That was my very first .com. Better late than never. Eventually, I relocated back to the Bay Area, but I was working directly or indirectly with everybody in the San Francisco office, which is where Salon was based. So in the Rincon Center, if you're curious, on Mission, and right near the bridge, right near the, what is the building? I'm forgetting. It was right by the bay. So I got to know everybody. So we would go to lunch with the accounting people, did a lot of interaction with the sales, ad sales especially. We learned about priority inversion when the one person who did not understand how things worked was manually manipulating the delivery rates for different campaigns and the inventory. Total mess. But understanding how the sales, ad sales process worked, like who they sold what to, when they were supposed to run, and what content. Very, very interesting. So there you go. My first encounter with Cory Doctorow, by the way, when I was working with Salon. I would eventually leave to do some independent entrepreneurial adventure for a little while, wearing all the hats and whatnot. Then I joined Palm, working for someone who I'd met in the Newton Group. And I was once again hired into a QA role because he was managing the QA group for the brand new Palm Pre. But because this was a brand new product and it was on a ridiculous schedule, it was merely a open role, but I very rarely did QA specifically. A lot of automation, a lot of low level. Eventually, and this, I think I've told this story, or I will, in at least one episode of one of my 4 programs. Stop the product from shipping with bad flash parts, so I got a little bonus for that. My first day of work and my 30th day of work were almost. They were definitely all consecutively in the office. I almost didn't go home sometimes. I would be there at 4 a.m. sometimes. I lived approximately a mile. I could walk to work. It's arguably twice as long as to drive because I could, didn't have to go around. I could go straight through as a pedestrian, through parking lots and whatnot to get to my office at Palm. And again, the main Palm building was the former Philips Components building, which was unified Philips Components and Philips Semiconductor at the time. But they were gone. Palm was in. We were in building 3, the unmarked secret projects building, working on the Pre. Very interesting. So because of the stuff that I was working on and the stuff that we found in our travels, I was interacting with a lot of different roles. The CEO of the company, Ruby, would come to our group frequently. So we had direct interactions with the CEO and marketing and what are we going to tell people? What are we working on? So once again, a lot of interaction, not necessarily in my lane. When you're a smaller company, it's really difficult to justify isolation. You tend to be sitting geographically near each other, which was the case. Here, the building buildings 1 and 2 were across the street, so we were not nearly so much separated in geography, although culturally there was still an us-them component. I would eventually depart Palm after really just being tired, because we moved on to the Pixie, and then things were getting a little weird with Palm. Obviously, probably within 6 months of my departure, they sold themselves to LG or HP. I think HP. HP got the bulk of WebOS and platform, and then WebOS got sold to LG, I think it was. So I was already gone. I was on to other things. But then, so I had my little sojourn into more entrepreneurial endeavors. Eventually, I would take a job with Jawbone, working for the same person I was working for at Palm. Probably a mistake. But it was another QA role. But here, I was applying all of my DSP knowledge from college and my speaker building days. So I was working on quality control in manufacturing analytics, which I had never done before. So I was supposed to rebuild our assembly line process, not using the resources in China. Had an opportunity to go to China, should have gone, didn't go, would go to China many years later. But here, because Jawbone is a very small company, they were renaming from Aleph, by the way. So I was working on Bluetooth headset manufacturing QC, especially calibration on the production line, and then measuring failure rates and so on. So all kinds of like super nerdy stuff. But, operations wants to know, like, how are you doing your data collection and reporting for the quality control on the production lines? We had to track down a problem on one of the production lines that ended up being very near a fan or an air conditioner. So it was putting noise in our calibration system, inductive coupling for the win. So operations, marketing wanted to know certain things about when products were working or what the specs were. So yeah, another small company, geographically separated, San Francisco for sales and marketing, and the CEO of the company. All of engineering was in Sunnyvale, California. So the separation of the concerns along these lines is very rarely helpful or healthy, which I'll get to in my wrap up. But yet another geographical isolationism issue. I did in there somewhere form Radio Sunnyvale. This was after Palm. Took a leadership Sunnyvale program, started Radio Sunnyvale as a podcast network in our big city with no local media. Formed an owners association for food truck owners called the Bay Area Mobile Food Vendors Association. Worked on various food trucks, got to know how hyperlocal marketing works. Was working on my regular DB platform for service industry, customer engagement. Later, I would have a house fire in 2013. So this is between basically 2010 to 2013. It was a weird time. April of 2013, house fire. So I moved to Vegas, took a job with Intel as the only Intel employee in Vegas, in Nevada even. Traveled around the world. I mentioned earlier, I did a little bit of field support in a sales adjacent group to help with our Galileo platform at the time. I was on a reality show, so some of that was marketing, I guess. Our sales for our Maker Innovator Group products was completely broken. That was one of the things that was It's undoing. But I did participate tangentially in the Intel Sales and Marketing Conference, which is held in Las Vegas. It was every year. I don't know if it still is. So even though Intel at the time was about 100,000 people, I was able to move around because I was the only Intel employee in Nevada. I had no office, so I was always on the road, 80% plus traveling. Most of the time in an Intel building was spent in a Intel IR5, probably in Leixlip, Ireland. Spent some time in Toulouse. Spent some time in the Arduino Officine in Turin. So I was always on the road, on the go. Tons of hackathons, tons of academic interaction. So my job title was software architect slash technical liaison. So I was kind of doing some marketing, never doing sales. Always presenting a technically competent but not so nerdy face to our efforts. So every time I was at a hackathon, I would help people with their projects regardless. Didn't matter if you were using the Intel Edison or whatever. So a lot of interaction with people on hopefully positive notes, a lot of interaction with the maker community, the maker ethos, etc. So very, very educational. Mostly, I'm going to say that Intel was probably my favorite job and probably the most educational, but only because of all these experiences I've run down so far. Only knowing the things that I had come across over at the time, the last 20 years, taught me what I needed to know to deal with the Intel super empire building culture, etc. So very interesting. No better example of the triumvirate that at a company like Intel. So what are my take-home lessons from all of these 30 years? Although, I mean, if you're going to be a stickler, the last, since pandemic to now, so 4 years, it'll be 4 years next month, huh? 4 years of my 30 years has been in Vegas trying to figure out how to deal with this crazy place. But I still do engineering all the time, daily. Right now, I could reach just out of my grasp is an Arduino Wi-Fi, R4 Wi-Fi, and a little LilyGo board for some LoRaWAN stuff. So yeah, I still do some engineering, some coding. There are some projects that we will work on for Innovate for Vegas Foundation that will result in a media platform for our dumb smart city. So a couple of take-homes, though, from my 30 years. Small companies and startups, where everyone will tend to communicate more effectively, not sure, but more across verticals. So the triumvirate will tend to be less isolationist. Tend and less are the keywords there. Doesn't solve everything. They'll play more active roles in various processes. So you'll be able to know what's happening. You'll be able to communicate, ideally, when schedules need to slip. My favorite marketing phrase. I was a program manager, but he was also in marketing at Jawbone. Literally said these words: "If the schedule is slipping, do we have time to add more features?" Yeah. So if your different verticals, if the triumvirate, or however you break down your infrastructure and your people who fill these roles in the infrastructure, if they can communicate more and if they can be more in a sort of a coherent, I won't say lockstep, but if they can at least move like a team, everybody will probably benefit from that. There's less time trying to get your work done and more time getting your work done. If the people in your marketing and sales groups, if you're in engineering, or if your engineers can play a part in the marketing and sales, or if everybody kind of knows the challenges that the others are facing and how what you do impacts what they're trying to do. Personally, I mean, this seems to make sense, but not always. But ultimately, that sounds like a better deal than isolationism, empire building. This was definitely true at Intel. I think as companies grow, as they become quote unquote successful, they will begin to trifurcate. Is that a word? I know bifurcation is. So you'll start to see, we need engineering over here, and we need to have more marketing people, and we need to, we just got another round of investment. We can hire some, I think I bumped into the microphone, sorry. We can hire some salespeople. We can, so you start growing different rates and different directions. Your culture starts to shift. When I was at Netscape, we didn't have pictures on our badges. They were just card keys to get into the building. And suddenly, we've grown so quickly in the past 2 months, we need to start putting pictures. And that was like a day of reckoning for a lot of people. The corner had been turned. You now work with people you don't know. So that was interesting. Most people working directly on or adjacent to a particular project or component are all important. This is something I definitely learned at True Vision. when you interact with these people that you are working with, all towards a common goal-ish, common-ish. If you're a one-product company, you're all trying to get that product out the door, pay the bills, right? So as you grow, you might add products and whatnot. But for the most part, you're all trying to do you're trying to do the same thing, essentially, and you're all important. So as I used to tell people, a startup doesn't really tend to have the money to hire extra people. So everyone that works at a smaller company is probably essential, and that is not always apparent to the actual person or to other people. So the more people interact and they know what they're working on, the more you realize that, oh, that's right, you make what I'm doing possible. I know that sounds crazy. Especially the time that I spent as a QA tester, QA engineer, engineering QA, just a tester. Now that I had that role so many times, but I understand the value that a person who cares about the product that you're trying to build and who takes the time or is responsible for much more horizontal knowledge, not all vertical, right? If you're working on the radios in a cell phone, you may not care about the display, but if you're in QA, you say, hey, the radio brings some interference into the display when during connection, whatever, right? Like, oh, you're using the integrated system from the point of view of the user, so you have a completely different perspective. You have tremendous value to add, so long as people realize that. Marketing, sales, engineering, these are very gross divisions. They may vary for you, but everybody at a smaller company is important. It's an important part of the process. The team, as the company grows, you will start to see us versus them. It's a bad strategy. You'll find more middle management. You got to take the stuff from the customer and give it to the engineers if you're an Office Space fan. So no matter what the size of the company or the project of the team, if you start migrating from we're all in this together to us versus them, and again, those three, probably the big thing early on is the empire building. Like, okay, you're in charge of engineering. Oh, okay, so I gotta hire my people, and I gotta craft a strategy that will guarantee that when blame is assigned, it will not be me and my group. Maybe I'm being a little bit cynical, but So most people are not appreciated as being a part. They're a cog in the system. But if everybody can sort of see, and this was one of the upsides at UMax, was that everybody in the team, everybody in the company really, had visibility. What you were working on could be seen by others, and you could see what other people were working on. So there was very little, I'm not going to say it was perfect, but there was very little in the way of us, them. Certainly in the building. Between Santa Clara and Fremont, maybe a little bit. This was also true at Leapfrog. You could see what everybody in the Los Gatos office was doing, frequent lunches of everybody. Let's all go to lunch. But the geographical separation with Emeryville was a problem. Certainly at Intel, spread around the world, substantial empire building, a lot of us, them, a lot of things that would, you felt as though you were like, are we working for the same company? So finally, I would suggest that you proactively seek out your counterparts internally and externally. If you can interact with a marketing or sales, if you're in engineering, or whichever, take your pick of the other two, you can simplify the role that you're in to align with these three, or you can come up with your own mix of like whatever your us them components are. It may be three, it may be four, maybe five, who knows? But if you can learn what they do, find out what they need to know, find out what they need to know, so you can tell them. If you're in sales, talk to your development teams, marketing teams, program manager, QA teams. And if you're in engineering, talk to your sales, your field sales, etc. Like, if the more you are aware, even if it's not part of your direct responsibility. So if you're at a bigger company, sometimes they will say things like, what are you doing out of your cube? Get back to work. But if you can interact with the other people, in my experience, this is my direct experience, so my advice is anecdotal, but I'm pretty sure it will be backed up by the likes of Simon Sinek and other, management and company culture and innovation culture. You may find, though, the more you interact with people, you may find, and this is why I linked to the elephant problem, the elephant in the room, the blind people, or the elephant in the dark. How does everybody with a different piece of the elephant identify the elephant when you can't see it? You will find that is a pretty good parable to ponder. You're all working on the same elephant, but not everybody has the same piece of the elephant. So are you sure what the elephant is? Are you sure it's an elephant? So in my travels, the Troublemaking Triumvirate, I was going to say trio. That was my original title. The Troublemaking Triumvirate of Tech is it's something to think about. It's an actual. I didn't do this whole episode for fun. It's something I've actually thought about on and off for 30 years now. Is how you interact with people, how you accomplish things, how much time. One of my go-to sayings when I was changing jobs so frequently, which I did. Working at Intel for as long as I did was about the longest I've ever worked for one company. The joy of contracting and getting laid off. Getting laid off was like twice, three times. Supermac and Intel. I think I always left before layoffs, but there were always layoffs. There were always companies going under in the .com era. But the big thing, that I've learned in my travels is that if you're going to have any sanity, and as I would say, I know it's time to leave when I spend more time trying to get things done than I do getting things done. So when you spend your time arguing in the us-them model, when you spend your time trying to convince people that doing the right thing is the right thing to do, but it doesn't align with our sales goals. It doesn't align with, you're like, well, but we're not going to sell a thing that works. When you spend your time in those arguments, rather than everybody being able to say, oh yes, I know the challenges we face because I've talked to you before many times and I know where things stand. I know how the team is doing. I know this and that. So the more intimately knowledgeable your various team members can be, the more they can communicate across their different verticals, their different boundaries. Don't always stay in your lane. At least stick your neck out a little bit and see what's going on in the other lanes. But yeah, the take home for me, really, over the last 30 years, small companies to me are better from my perspective as far as communication. And yes, you're resource constrained, and yes, you are shorthanded, and yes, it'd be great to have all the resources of a big company. Don't believe that one ever. But the take home, again, is make sure you communicate. Make sure I've learned this the hard way. Make sure you don't fall into the empire building trap, the us-them, the arguing, or the sometimes backstabbing, some intrigue, some palace intrigue at Intel. Absolutely, palace intrigue at a small company where you can all be in one room together is a little bit more difficult. Not impossible, but at least you kind of have some sense that, like, oh, if I stab you, if I drill a hole in your lifeboat, I'm in the same lifeboat. That's not going to work. So you can visualize it any way you want. But it's been an interesting adventure. I've told people that I want to spend my second half century working on maybe socially responsible or good things. I was hoping Leapfrog would be that. It was not. But I would like to take all this stuff I've learned, and I've only scratched the surface here. But I'd like to take all the stuff I learned and apply it towards, elevating things, people, community, etc. I'm learning that to quote Sisyphus, I'll just stick with the boulder. So it's an uphill climb, to be sure, pushing the boulder up the hill if you're not getting that reference. But if we can all take some time to figure out what the other members of our team are trying to accomplish, maybe we can actually accomplish. So there you go. That brings an end to what I thought would have been maybe half as long an episode as this has turned out to be. Hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully if we ever meet in person, you will ask me about one of my many adventures in this area specifically, if you have any questions. I would love, even though this is Quaggling Sand, which is more of a self-serving of my 4 productions each week, I would love to have conversations about these sorts of things on a personal level, if you are so inclined. So ponder. In the meantime, I will close with my usual shameless self-promotion, buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, DAN Hugo. I have links to my various projects there. I have also links to my favorite coffee beans to indicate, and I did a whole episode on coffee, making coffee previously. So any monies, and you are not in any way obligated to give any money, but if there is an interest or desire to throw some money in the tip jar, it will go towards the purchase of coffee or coffee devices, beans. I try to avoid using paper filters. I know that's blasphemy, but I will occasionally get a new coffee device, although very rare now. I have my eye on some white coffee beans to try some very, 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 that's super lightly roasted coffee as an espresso. So that's probably my next big get, 16 ounces of the bean I'm interested in for $14. So I'm not waiting for that money, but if you do give money to the Buy Me a Coffee Fund, it will be backdated appropriately. And then Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo, same thing. No need to spend any money. I will probably start using the Ko-fi site to do episode announcements. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how that could work. Neither of these sites has a good automation path, so kind of annoying. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time and listening, and I hope this was educational or at least thought-provoking, especially if you are involved in a small adventure, AD in square brackets, venture, a startup or a small company. And a lot of what I'm talking about could apply to restaurants, could apply to retail stores, whatever. There are different people doing different vertical responsibilities that are symbiotic. They are, or maybe parasitic. They are interrelated. So often it comes down to not knowing what the other person needs to get what they need to get done, so that you can get what you need to get done. So just being more familiar and communicating more. Great ideas. You should try them. That's where I'll leave it. Thank you so much. Until next time.